Well, what's going to happen is there are going to be a lot of trade deals, and there's going to be clarity on the tax cuts, and then firms are going to lift off. But think about it. Even before that happened, we're getting really strong jobs numbers. First quarter capital equipment investment was north of 20%, one of the best quarters ever, because all of America knows that the golden age is coming, and we got to start building stuff before everybody else gets in front of us. And so I think that you're going to look at a second half of the year that's way, way north of 3%, probably north of 4%, to give us one of the better years we've ever had. Because even with the uncertainty that you talk about, that I've written widely about over the last 25 years, even with that uncertainty, we've got strong jobs numbers and strong investment. And so once the uncertainty is lowered, then a liftoff from there is really going to be something to see.
National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett with me yesterday on this program, predicting 4% plus growth in the U.S. economy in the second half of this year. Joining me now is O'Leary Ventures Chairman Kevin O'Leary. Kevin, good to see you. Thank you so much for being here. And in the past, you've raised some concerns about the direction of the U.S. economy. What is your reaction to what you just heard from Kevin Hassett?
Well, I like to be an optimist, and 4% would be spectacular.
Yeah.
It would be absolutely phenomenal. Now, I don't know if we're going to get there, but he did bring up the tariff issues. And the way I look at the tariff deal is we've got this date of July 9th, and that's when the 90-day freeze, particularly on the China package, comes off. Will we have resolution by then? And what I mean by that, Maria, is what I think's happening here, because the tariffs are all over the map. I mean, the Canadians just dropped their tariffs practically to zero, and yet we still have tariffs on them. The European thing is in flux. Of course, we've got the Japanese situation, the Indian. I'd like to see resolution to all of this at whatever the reciprocal rate's going to be. And the way I look at it, and I think the way the market's starting to look at it, given the recovery we've had, maybe we're going to a place where reciprocal platform is around 10%, which effectively becomes a value-added tax on America, a consumption tax, like every other country has. We've been never able to pass a consumption tax through Congress, but if we call it a tariff, it seems to be able to work. So if that's where we're going, the market's going to be okay with that, because there's so many countries around the world and economies that function very well between 7% and 14% consumption taxes. If that's where we're going, he could be right. But if it's more chaos and more 145 and the China package is on its own an issue around IP law and everything else, we've got a lot of moving parts here. But right now, the market's willing to give the administration the benefit of the doubt.
Well, because President Trump has been right. I mean, you know it. You've talked about China and its bad behavior. How else is he going to move the needle on this bad behavior, these non-tariff barriers? But look, you recently said that the president's big, beautiful bill is a disaster for small business. Why?
Very simple. You remember the PPP and ERC programs. They were the only bills available during the pandemic to small business. All the other bills, like the CHIPS and Science Act, the infrastructure bill, all of that, there wasn't a dime in there for small business. And there are millions of small businesses in America. And they drew down the PPP and the ERC to stay alive and keep their employees employed. And it worked. Now, we've got a situation in this new beautiful bill, and I don't think anybody reads these things. I read it. I read all these bills through the eyes of small business. And I found a section in there that looks like a cut and paste that says the IRS will get extended powers to audit small businesses for up to 9 years that took the ERC. Now, that is going to cause chaos in valuations. If you have that hanging over your head, it almost seems unfair and un-American to do that to small business. And I'm not sure everybody's aware of this provision in the bill. I'm heading down tonight to the Hill to get a gong and walk down the halls banging it, saying, what are you guys doing here? You can't do that to small business. Somebody should fix this in the big, beautiful bill, because it's not beautiful for small business. That's totally unfair, because if you're trying to do a deal or get financing or raise capital, and you know you've got that uncertainty for 9 years, that's going to cause chaos.
Well, look, we've had Kelly Loeffler on this program, the head of the small business, and she's talked all about supporting small business. Are you telling me that there's nothing in the bill that supports small business?
No, I'm telling you, Maria, there's a provision in here that hurts small business, and it really will be devastating to them. And I don't know how it got in there. It could have been a cut and paste from a previous bill. But whatever it is, somebody's got to raise the red flag, and I'm going to do it, because this is not good. You know, small business creates 62% of jobs. And every small business in my portfolio has called me and said, what the hell is this? Where'd this come from? Of course I took ERC because I had to stay alive, and now they're punishing me for it. I understand, Maria, there was fraud in the ERC, as there's fraud in every government program. But to punish every small business in America this way makes absolutely no sense. And I'm very optimistic that this will get fixed before this big, beautiful bill passes. I don't think enough people know about this, and I thank you for bringing it up, because this is a huge problem.
Well, look, I didn't bring it up. You brought it up. But I want to say this. What I am going to bring up is this. There's increased loan approvals and lending activity. The SBA has seen a significant increase in loan approvals under Kelly Loeffler. 80% increase in loan approvals, okay? So they're trying to move things forward faster. You've got this focus on deregulation. They're taking red tape out so that small business can move forward. They want to extend the tax cuts so that small business can get tax cuts there. They're trying to streamline and reorganize the SBA, and they want to get a focus on American manufacturing and bringing supply chains back to America. So for you to sit here and tell me that there's nothing in here for small business and that small business is getting screwed in the big, beautiful bill, I just don't see it. However, I will look at what you're talking about in terms of the IRS.
I agree with all of those provisions, but the one that's overhanging that really, really hurts is giving more power to the IRS to cause conflict with small business. Who wants to do that? What Republican wants to give more power?
I don't like that. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, well then let's agree on that. But everything else, I applaud any support for small business. And right now, with rates over 7% on mortgages, it's really important to give them these. But this overhanging war on small business from the IRS, that's got to go.
Okay. I want to get your take before you go on China, because did you see what happened with cattle? Shares of the Chinese battery company soaring in Hong Kong, up 16%. Now it's the largest equity offering so far this year, Kevin. You and I have had this discussion about all those Chinese stocks traded on U.S. exchanges. That's another economic lever for President Trump to pull. He hasn't gone there yet. We know that would be death for the Chinese Communist Party, for actually see those Chinese stocks get off of U.S. exchanges, because that ends their funding by American investors. That's why cattle went public in Hong Kong. Your reaction?
Look, I agree. They have to go attract capital wherever they can get it. But at the end of the day, the biggest market still remains the United States of America, not only for the purchase of batteries, but also for capital markets. So that has to get resolved. But I will say one thing. Most of us that are investors, and in small business and large, want to do business with the Chinese people. It's a massive market. We want that deal done. We just want to protect our IP. We want access to the legal system to resolve trade disputes. I'm a China hawk. I said, let's go 400% so we have an embargo until this gets worked out. Yeah. The China package is different than all the rest of the tariffs. We've talked about that quite a bit. I really want this China deal done so that opens up the markets. Let us compete on a level playing field, and it'll be great.
What did you think about the stablecoin legislation? The Senate advanced this landmark stablecoin legislation late last night. We weren't sure. For a minute there, I thought it was, dead on arrival. 16 Democrats flipped after ethics standards for government employees and limits for tech companies issuing stablecoins were included in the bill. Democrat Senator Mark Warner, one of the 16 to flip, said that the latest bill is not perfect, but the U.S. cannot afford to keep standing on the sidelines. This now legislation moves to the Senate floor for debate, with the final vote happening as early as Friday. Kevin, you and I have spoken in the past about the banks and whether or not they were complicit. Maybe they don't want legislation to move forward. The Genius Act, they didn't want that to move forward because maybe it infringes on their own business.
This is a groundbreaking move. Congratulations to Haggerty, 66 votes. It now goes to the Senate. Thune, I hope, can bring it before the break. We don't know yet. But this is so important for us to be competitive in digital payment systems around the world. And I know what happened on the flips. I'm sure Schumer had something to do with this. He basically said, look, I don't want to give them a 2/3. I'm going to let them get it through, but I want to hold back on a partisan basis. That's probably what occurred. But still, 66 is enough. It's good enough. And this bill is relatively clean. It's a groundbreaker for crypto, because once we get this passed, this is not Bitcoin. This is just digital payment systems, but it does assure us that the U.S. dollar becomes the de facto currency around the world for price discovery on commodities. Who doesn't want that? Elizabeth Warren tried very hard to shut it down. She wasn't successful, and I'm happy about that.
All right, so am I going to see you with a gong on Capitol Hill, up and down the halls today? Is that what I'm going to see today?
Yes, and I'll have one of those symbols on my back and a gong going right. That's what I'm going to do.
We'll set some cameras over there. Kevin, good to see you, my friend. Thank you. I want to switch gears and show you where we are on Capitol Hill. The vote is happening. The House passes the beautiful bill, 215 to 214. This is momentous. The president is seeing his agenda move forward. The House is passing the big, beautiful bill. It has now passed. Huge news out of Washington. Right in step with Mike Johnson's goal of getting this passed out of the House by the Memorial Day holiday. Now they will leave for the weekend with President Trump's big, beautiful bill passing the House, now on its way to the Senate next. There's the gavel. Cheryl, thank you. We'll be right back.
All right, Tiffany, what do you make of this?
Well, this is really, this is something that no other administration has ever been able to do in our country. It's something that Democrat and Republicans have talked about a lot. They've talked about tariffs. They've talked about the need for setting the stage and showing leadership around the world. It's just no one's been able to do it. President Trump is doing it. And I mean, it's unprecedented what we are seeing. We have the UK, United Kingdom, and China coming to the table, talking about deals. We also have India, who's offering no tariffs. We have Vietnam, who's already offered no tariffs. This is a very strong positioning, and President Trump is showing that he is leading through peace, through strength. This is something we haven't had in a very long time in this country, and he's a businessman. This is why the American people elected him, to negotiate and get deals that work for America, not just in the short term, but in the long term.
Jackie, the market trying to read the tea leaves. The Dow's up 0.3%. The S&P turns positive. The NASDAQ unchanged now on the day. So coming up off of some of the lows that we had this morning, is I think people are trying to digest, is this a threat? Is it a negotiation tactic to get people to speed things along? How do you read this?
I think they're trying to shepherd the ducks to come to the table a little faster, even though they've made great progress, Tiffany, to your point, for sure. And don't discount President Trump. I think he means it when he says, if you don't do what you're supposed to do, yes, I will re-implement these tariffs. I'm not saying that it's an idle threat. I just think it's meant to prod everybody along. And there has been tremendous progress made, but the market and the American people want to see more ink deals. He said these deals are very hard to paper. We understand that. But we need to see a little more from the trade negotiations. And I think the president is aware of that as well. And so, you get Scott Bessent to sit there and say that, and people are listening very closely, and they know that he'll take it seriously and he'll see it through if he has to. And so it'll motivate them for sure, I think.
David, it is shocking to me that the S&P 500 is now 290 points higher than it was on April 2nd, Liberation Day at 4 p.m., right before. So it has been a full round trip, if not more. Yes. But I'm wondering if we're talking about Liberation Day and tariffs, and Dagan has mentioned this, I want her to weigh in after this. It's a revenue raiser. Mm-hmm. But how much more important is this sort of threat of a tariff, threat of Liberation Day tariffs, given the pressure we've seen about the downgrade that we talked about from Moody's, about a deficit that doesn't look like it's going to be normalized anytime soon? How much more important and added urgency does this create?
Well, I think realism is starting to affect not only the Trump administration in terms of what they're trying to do, and Bessent saying, 90 days in 90 countries just isn't going to be possible. They're now talking about maybe regionalizing these deals. To have some areas of Africa, some areas of Asia, the problem I have with that, they're talking about Central America as one unit. You can't treat the Sandinistas in Nicaragua the same way you're going to treat our ally Bukele in El Salvador. So there are differences even if you try to regionalize it. So it's going to be tough. But again, the markets realize that first position, as Bessent said right at the beginning. Remember, he said this is the high watermark, right when we had Liberation Day in the beginning of April, and that was the high watermark. It may go up a little bit from where it is now, again on the way to deals. But I think the market is a lot calmer, and you see it with the results. I mean, as you mentioned, the market is now recovering from its deathly fear of tariffs.
Dagan.
And also, And I think all along, if you just listen closely to the things that are repeated over and over again, it's also that 10% is the baseline.
Yes.
And I have repeated myself until I am blue in the face. If only I would shut up. But
No, that would be
revenue
fun.
is important to the president, and from tariffs, and 10% will be on the table and will be in place to raise revenue, because President Trump views the United States as, you're coming here and using us. We're a terrific customer, so you got to pay a cover charge to get into the club. And
remember those days? Wow.
As
We've aged.
wackadoodle as that chart was that the president held up with the reciprocal tariffs, which weren't based on actual tariffs. Thank you, Peter Navarro. It still forced all of those nations to come and negotiate with us. It still was such a dramatic wake-up call for them that is what has kind of pushed everybody to pick up the phone or maybe text message with the White House and say, all right, let's right size our trading relationship. Let's level this trading field. But the same goes with, it's also time for the Republicans to get their act together and put together and push out this pro-growth package, because the president's doing what he can on the trade side, and we need to have ballast. Who talks about the barbell? Is it you or is it Brian? Anyway, we need some ballast, some growth ballast on the other side.
Besson has talked about the barbell when he was like the financial and then the tech, and then we're missing the middle.
I'm talking about the barbell with some pro-growth tax cuts.
So Tiffany, weigh in on that, right? Because the last hour we were talking about a downgrade, right?
Right.
Late, unexpected, no one cares, except that this time yields tend to suggest that we care a little bit more than we did 15 years ago when S&P downgraded us, just by the mere fact that we're 2% higher on the 10-year yield than we were back there. And we are thinking about financing all of this, and you need a pro-growth, pro-supply side solution. Your thoughts?
Yeah, look, it's a place, I mean, that's not a good place to be necessarily, but at the same time, we have to look at what the last 4 years were and what President Trump was handed. And those decisions that you have to make, obviously we know the market doesn't like change, it likes stability, and President Trump's coming in, and it's a multi-pronged approach. It's not just tariffs, it's also the pro-growth package that Congress does need to get their act together and pass. When you look at massive and rapid deregulation, tax cuts, energy. No one really talks about the energy aspect either, but pro-energy package is in there as well, which is huge for the American consumer and the American worker. That's what will spur business out in the real America, and that's what they're watching. They're kind of holding back and watching, not necessarily the tariffs, maybe to a certain degree, but they're watching that tax cut, and they want to know that it's going to be permanent. And so businesses are holding back a little bit right now. I think we will start to see those numbers change once President Trump's big vision for longer-term economic stability, and it's not just economic stability, it's also national security and safety for our country.
Can I just say one thing about Moody's? Remember, it was Moody's and Fitch and S&P that helped to create the financial crisis in 2008 and 9 by putting all these great credit ratings on subprime mortgages by people who couldn't pay them back. So, you got to be a little wary. That's not Moody's is not the end all in calling things right.
I think this market is taking that with a grain of salt.
I
think
agree.
you're right. I think.
Well, and the irony is, Florida can issue debt and they're AAA rated, but the United States isn't. Now, Florida has a governor who has balanced the budget and has a surplus, but I'm like, you're really telling me that Florida is safer than the United States government? The irony of all of that is not lost on any of us.
Florida doesn't have its own currency.
Bingo. Exactly. They can't print their money.
Congress needs to rein in their spending, and this is their opportunity to show the American people if they can really deliver.
Good Thursday morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. I'm Maria Bartiromo, and it is Thursday, May 22nd. It is 8 a.m. on the button on the East Coast. Secretary of the Interior Doug Burgum testifying before the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee yesterday on his department's budget. Watch.
Our national resources are national assets that belong to the public, and they should be responsibly managed to help grow our economy, help balance our budget, and generate a revenue for the American citizens. With common sense approaches and modern systems, we can increase the returns for our citizens, strengthen our economy, create great paying and meaningful jobs, all while protecting our beautiful lands, our abundant wildlife, and our clean air and clean water. The President's 2026 budget blueprint requests $11.9 billion in current authority for the department, providing significant savings to the American people. Of that amount, $10.6 billion is within the jurisdiction of the Interior Environment Appropriations Subcommittee.
Gentlemen, now the man himself, Interior Secretary Doug Burgum. Mr. Secretary, thanks very much for being here this morning. Good to see you. And I want to start with the breaking news of the morning. And of course, that is that the House has passed President Trump's big, beautiful bill, which, of course, includes money for the border, to secure the border, money for the wall, extending the tax cuts, which President Trump signed into law in his first term, cutting spending and unleashing American energy dominance. Can you walk us through what specifically that means to our energy capacity and what you're expecting to happen in the coming couple of years as a result?
Well, Maria, first of all, this incredible piece of historic legislation that passed this morning doesn't happen without President Trump's leadership. His vision around lower taxes, lower regulation, unleashing America's potential is coming to true. This is promises made and promises kept. And this bill has got so many fantastic things in it, whether it's border security, national defense, unleashing energy, lower taxes for Americans, lower taxes for senior citizens. This thing is just fantastic, and congratulations, not just the president, but his teamwork with Mike Johnson's team. These guys working round the clock to make it happen is going to lift up all Americans. And of course, from an interior standpoint, 41% of that southwestern border is interior land. So to see that we've finally got the funding to support law enforcement and finish the wall, that is fantastic. And of course, unleashing American energy, President Trump is providing such support to Chris Wright, Secretary of Energy, Lee Zeldin, leading our EPA, myself, everybody who's involved in the National Energy Dominance Council. He's empowering us to, again, cut red tape and allow American innovation drive forward and help us get production up. And that's why, as we head into Memorial Day weekend, inflation adjusted, we got the lowest gas prices in 2 decades as Americans head out, expected to head out in record numbers this weekend, visiting friends, visiting family, visiting loved ones, and getting in their automobiles and driving, because President Trump made it affordable again. So what I'm really asking is, from a practical standpoint, what does this mean for America in terms of unleashing the energy capacity and unleashing American dominance? I spoke yesterday with the chairman and CEO of Chevron, Mike Wirth, who was telling me a little about their operations in the Gulf of America. And, you know, what they're doing in the Permian Basin right now is just incredible, where they've got, you know, operations deep in the water, and the pressure that they've got, I think it's 20,000 pounds per square inch. And you know, he said to me, look, the equivalent of an elephant standing on a quarter. I mean, this is the kind of you know, strength that we've got there in terms of excavation. So, I mean, what do you see happening in, let's say, at the end of President Trump's term? How will America be different as a result of this big, beautiful bill as it relates to energy? Well, I think there's a number of things going on, both inside the bill and outside the bill, that we're doing every day. We made a change for the Gulf of America developers. It's about 16% of the oil in America comes out of the Gulf. One small change that we made, changed one little regulation that allowed the commingling as they bring these products ashore, and which is completely safe, completely everything's just fine. 100,000 barrel a day increase just from changing one piece of red tape. We've also made a rule relative to some crazy Biden rules that were just choking the small developers in the Gulf. It takes about $7 billion of bonding expense off of their balance sheets, allows them to spend that money on innovation. And of course, the companies like Chevron and Mike Wirth that are doing the deeper water development, the innovations that they have with those high pressure well developments, all of this innovation, if we unleash this innovation, it's going to mean more supply. We're able to sell energy to our friends and allies and have more prosperity at home.
Yeah. For sure. And I think the deregulatory part of the agenda is so important. And markets are certainly focused on that. Secretary, the Interior Department announced this week that you're looking at potentially allowing companies to deep sea mine for minerals under the ocean floor off of the coast of America's Samoa. China and Russia both increasing their mining activity in the region. And of course, President Trump did that historic deal with Ukraine to excavate and partake in the profits of the rare earth minerals there. Tell us what you're announcing and the importance of this deal.
Well, American Samoa is a U.S. territory in the South Pacific. China's been active on three sides of American Samoa. China and Russia both leading the world right now in their activity around deep sea mining for minerals. And American Samoa represents a big opportunity. This is the Interior Department. We have responsibility for managing American territories across the Caribbean and the Pacific. And we're putting out an opening for initiating the process to lease those ocean bed minerals. America has more acreage of undersea seabed that we can lease than the entire continental U.S.
Wow.
We're talking billions of acres of seabed. This is a huge asset of America that can be developed safely and smartly. And what's down there? Nickel, cobalt, and other key minerals that we need for national defense. And with the modern techniques that we have today, you can mine these with robotic undersea miners. You can do it in a way that doesn't affect the ocean or the wildlife in the ocean, the fish. And so this is there's so many great advances. But and again, we're trailing. One of the things we learned, Maria, in the last month on April 4th, when China put export controls on critical minerals, a wake-up call for all of us in America. The over 20 top minerals that we have, 85%, that we need of the top 20 critical minerals, China controls 85% of the refining of that. So this is one of the most precarious supply chains we have for defense, technology, automotive, and certainly the Trump administration. We've got a deep commitment to get ourselves back in the game of mining and refining of critical minerals in our country. This is absolutely necessary for national security.
Oh, yeah. No, this could not be more important, particularly at a time that we're talking about innovation in AI and quantum computing, and we need more energy and battery pressure, et cetera. And, I also think it's interesting that, the president is the first president to really focus on how dependent America is on China for so many things. You're talking about rare earth minerals. What about prescription drugs, right? What about all of the production of the key things that we need so much? So this was so important that the president has made this a priority. And I'm glad to see some in corporate America are beginning to figure out there are serious national security issues related to all of this. I want to get your take on the response from China on President Trump's Golden Dome. In this big, beautiful bill, there is obviously money increasing for defense, and the president went through the Golden Dome yesterday, similar to the Iron Dome in Israel. Suddenly, China says that it is concerned about the president's Golden Dome. Why would that be?
I can't imagine why. Obviously, this is a super smart thing for us to do. And of course, we're living in a world. We know it was just in the last 18 months. There was a day when there was 400 rockets fired at Israel at the same time. And 399 were shot down. And then everybody in America is like, oh, okay, what was the score of the ball game last night? We take it for granted that we're able to have that level of ability to not knockdown threats that if we hadn't had that, Israel would have been destroyed in a day.
Right.
And that doesn't happen without AI. That doesn't happen without advanced computing and technology to have that kind of defense. And so for President Trump to be pursuing the Golden Dome for America at a time when people have got both the capability and the willing to use it against us and our allies is absolutely critical. But none of that works without more electricity, which is what, again, President Trump understands is better than anyone. We've got to increase our baseload electricity from traditional sources in this country, or we aren't going to have the power to run AI.
So what about nuclear? How significant should we be looking at nuclear technology in terms of part of the portfolio of energy alternatives?
Well, nuclear is going to play a key role going forward. Finally, the private sector is back in. There's dozens of companies working on new technologies. But the timeline for that is even though they're moving at a rapid pace, it's really in the 2030s before we're going to start to see significant scale coming from nuclear. So right now, the game is we've got to get our natural gas resources. We've got to be able to build linear infrastructure. There was some things in the big, beautiful bill that are important for us building pipelines. The anti-American, what I call anti-American, because if you're against liquid fuels, you're not on Team USA. If you were for all batteries, you were on Team China because they were controlling the minerals. But if you're on Team USA, we've got to be able to build pipelines in this country, especially natural gas pipeline. I'm encouraged that both the states many states that have resisted these passes are getting on board. But we need to make sure that we pass legislation that allows America to build linear infrastructure. We've got to get low-priced, reliable, clean American gas to every corner of this country.
And we've spoken with a number of startups in the nuclear energy business, and they too are excited about what's to come. Real quick on the upcoming holiday, an estimated 45.1 million Americans expected to travel this Memorial Day weekend. That is up 5.5% from 2024. Mr. Secretary, what should they be expecting in the way of gasoline prices and the president's energy agenda affecting travel?
Well, we're down 15% on gas prices since President Trump took office. Another promise made, promise delivered. Inflation adjusted, that's the lowest price in 2 decades. Of course, your individual results may vary. If you're in a state, like California, where they've got super high gas taxes, you're going to be paying more than people are in other states that don't have that. But anyway, I tell everybody, drive safe this weekend and enjoy being with your families.
All right, we will leave it there. And good to see you as well, Secretary. Be safe this Memorial Day weekend. Thank you, sir. Welcome back. Well, China placing anti-dumping duties as high as 74.9% on plastic imports from the United States. The European Union, Japan, and Taiwan also facing similar duties from China. It comes as China blocked exports of 7 rare earth metals to the United States, despite agreeing to suspend or remove the non-tariff countermeasures taken against the U.S. Beijing also says that the 90-day tariff pause is not enough to negotiate a trade deal. Joining me now is Gatestone Institute senior fellow and author of Plan Red, China's Project to Destroy America, Gordon Chang, back with me. Gordon, this is interesting. We were all talking about how this, 90-day pause was a positive, and here comes China undermining the United States again.
Yes. The trade arrangement announced last Monday was more favorable to China than the United States. The smart thing to do would be to make sure it stays in place. But what you have in China is a political system that is really very difficult for a leader to compromise. And we now have a leader in China that doesn't want to compromise. And right now, I think he wants to humble the president of the United States, which is the reason why he's not adhering to the deal and why he's hitting us with these anti-dumping tariffs, which really, which in very many ways are unjustified.
President Trump took the tariffs down during this 90-day pause. He spoke to Bret Baier on Fox News on Friday when they did the interview in Abu Dhabi, and he explained in a very nice way why he did a deal with China. Watch this.
If I didn't do that deal with China, I think China would have broken apart. Not us, them. We weren't going to break. We're not going to break. They would have broken apart. Our country has a lot of spirit.
Gordon, what about that? Because I think President Trump knew exactly when to hit China. He knows that the economy there is weaker than they're letting on.
Yes, and President Trump offered the Chinese an off-ramp to a collision, not only with the United States, but with the rest of the world, because China intends to flood the rest of the world with products, and nobody wants to see their local industries decimated. This was a very generous offer on the part of the United States, and the Chinese can't take it. So this shows that there is going to be real problems ahead because Xi Jinping is now on that collision course.
Maybe that's also working its way into Wall Street's thinking with this decline this morning. Meanwhile, there's South Korea, the presidential candidates facing off in a weekend debate ahead of this snap election happening on June 3rd, Gordon. The vote replacing the former president, Yoon Suk-yeol, who was impeached over his short-lived martial law declaration. Remember that in December. The current frontrunner, Lee Jae-myung, says there's no need to rush into early trade agreements with the United States, criticizing the hasty engagement with the Trump administration. So here you go, Trump, once again, in the middle of this election. You've said Lee would be bad for democracy anyway.
Yes, well, Yi was responsible for a series of impeachments that paralyzed the government of Yoon Suk-yeol, which is the reason why Yoon, on December 3, declared martial law. Yi is determined to take down South Korea's democracy. He may not be able to do it, but that's the direction. Now, South Korea has had leftist presidents before, but Yi is different because he is more determined, he's more ruthless, he's more pro-North Korea, he's more anti-U.S. than his predecessors. So this is going to be a very difficult 5 years. He's now got a 51 to 29% lead in the polls, and the conservatives are not united. So it's most probable that he's going to be elected, and we're going to have a very, very hard half decade, and I hope we get through it.
Yeah, I mean, he's another ally of Xi Jinping, we should point out.
And Kim Jong-un.
Of course.
And the reason why he doesn't want a trade deal with the U.S. is because he knows that that would solidify relations between Seoul and Washington, and that's the last thing that he wants.
Yeah. A lot here. Liz Peek, jump in.
Gordon, good morning. I'm worried that President Trump's going to be speaking with Vladimir Putin today. And last night, Russia really lambasted Ukraine once again. And now we also have Xi Jinping sort of trying to exert some authority over Trump. Are they testing him? I mean, is this a concerted effort to kind of push Trump into a corner? What do you think the president should do in response to China's breach of this trade agreement?
I think President Trump should lay the facts out to the American public and the world and reimpose tariffs. If the Chinese break the deal no longer exists, and therefore President Trump needs to show will. He needs to show Xi Jinping that he's not afraid of the Chinese. And that's what the Chinese are now saying to their own people, that they got the best of the U.S. and that China is strong and the United States not only is weak, but is in terminal decline. Now, in that type of situation, you can't cooperate with a leader like that. And we got to do something that we Americans don't want to do, and that is not to assume the best of other countries. So, yes, we've got to go after Xi Jinping. And then Vladimir Putin might notice that act of will. But if we don't do that, the Chinese and the Russians, they're just going to continue assaulting us.
Yeah, and throw Iran in there as well, because China is backing all the bad guys. China is backing Iran, backing Russia, all in the face of President Trump trying to create peaceful atmospheres across the world.
Yes, Xi Jinping is waging proxy wars. He's supporting Russia and Ukraine. He's supporting Iran and Israel. He's supporting Pakistan against India, and he's destabilizing North Africa. He is setting the world on fire.
Yeah, what a chessboard. Gordon, great to see you. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Maria.
Did you ask President Putin to meet with you?
About what?
About Ukraine.
Yeah, of course I did. I talked to him about it. I said, when are we going to end this, Vladimir? I know him for a long time now. I said, when are we going to end this bloodshed, this bloodbath? It's a bloodbath. And I do believe he wants to end it. It's a terrible war. It's a very hard to extradite themselves away from what's taking place over there. I said to him, we got to get going. And I did say also, if I thought that you couldn't do it, I'd step away, because what are you going to do? We don't have boots on the ground. We wouldn't have boots on the ground. But we do have a big stake. And the financial amount that was put up is just crazy.
President Trump speaking with Vladimir Putin on the phone yesterday for more than 2 hours, seeking to end the war with Ukraine. Trump also spoke with Ukraine's Zelensky before that Putin call and then after again, and then wrote on Truth Social, Russia and Ukraine will immediately start negotiations toward a ceasefire and, more importantly, an end to the war. Now, the Kremlin is saying this morning, quote, there are no deadlines in place right now. The New York Post, meanwhile, is reporting China's role in bankrolling Russia's war machine, calling for the U.S. to place secondary sanctions on Beijing. This is something we've been focused on as well, China being complicit here. Joining me now is Fox News senior strategic analyst and chairman of the Institute for the Study of War, General Jack Keane, back with me. General, good to see you. Thanks so much for weighing in here. Give us your assessment of the call with Putin, President Trump, and what he said afterwards.
Well, I think we've gotten much of the same from Mr. Putin. I mean, he's got a couple of objectives in mind here. He knows full well that President Trump came into office wanting to end this war, stop the killing, as the president has emphasized many times. He uses the term bloodbath as an example of that, and he's impatient about it. He has a sense of urgency about it. So what Putin has done as a result of the phone call, he's rejected the temporary ceasefire once again. And why is that? Why does he reject that ceasefire? He does that, Maria, because he knows full well if he goes to a ceasefire, that stops the killing. And then the pressure is off the administration to make major concessions to him. And he wants major maximum concessions that make Ukraine so vulnerable, he'll eventually be able to take control of it. He's never given up on that aspiration. And then he also knows the president is impatient, so he drags out these negotiations and makes no concessions at any of these negotiations that have taken place, and I don't expect any of it going forward. And then he's obviously talking to the president because he wants to avoid sanctions, and his attempt is to convince the president that he's interested in peace as much as the president is. Of course, his actions don't speak to that. And he's also trying to convince the president that what he wants is normalized relations with Russia, which would have significant economic benefit to both countries. That is a true statement. But it's pretty hard to have normalized relations with a criminal who's conducting genocide on a regular basis and attempting to take over a sovereign nation and threatening the other nations in Europe at the same time. So where are we? Well, I think we are where we are. Rejection of the ceasefire, more negotiations, more dragging this out. What did I think we should do? I think the Europeans, Senator Graham and others and advisors have got it right. It's time to slap it hard on Putin. Yes, that will affect the relationship. I grant you that. But we're making no progress maintaining this relationship at the expense of the people on that battlefield. The bloodbath is going on. And listen to this. Putin has rushed into the front lines. He has rushed thousands of additional troops, trained less than a month. The killing of his own troops have gone from the high 30,000 in 24 to the high 40,000 now, edging on 50,000. And he's increased the targeting of civilians. So he has increased the bloodbath, and Putin could care less about how many soldiers are killed. We know that. We've observed them, because he's only trying to accomplish the objective, which is to control Ukraine. The president, on the other hand, he genuinely and sincerely wants to stop the killing. Putin could care less. He wants to take advantage of that feeling and that emotion the president has by increasing the bloodbath and the pressure on us.
Yeah, I mean, President Trump says that 5,000 soldiers and people are dying every week, 5,000. So the president is threading a needle here. He's using his economic levers to push for change, right? He's saying, okay, well, I won't put sanctions on Russia now because I know that eventually they want to do a trade deal. So he's talking about the potential for a peace deal and perhaps down the road a trade deal. Same thing with China, right? They're trying to act nice, play nice with this 90-day pause in the heavier tariffs while watching what China does. But the whole time, China is complicit. And we've talked about this a number of times. China is supporting Russia's war. China is supporting the bad guys over and over again. So what is the right tact from President Trump's standpoint in terms of using those economic levers?
I think it's time. I mean, it really is. I think the New York Post editorial yesterday had it right. Let's go for these sanctions once and for all and slap these countries who are assisting Russia. Go after Russia's oil, gas, and uranium industries, and that will have impact on China. And the pressure on China, given the pressure that's already there in terms of their own economic woes, as the editorial is trying to suggest, would likely put China placing pressure on Russia to stop this thing.
Yeah.
Because of the impact it's going to have. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I do know that it's time to put these economic levers on Russia. I know it will affect the relationship, and that's of concern to the president, but we have an impasse here. We're not making any progress, and Putin is increasing the killing because he believes that's the way he can get concessions out of the administration, because the administration wants to stop the killing.
Yeah, and that's our leverage. It's the economic levers. That's the U.S.'s leverage to actually affect change. And then there's Iran. The supreme leader there now voicing doubts over any nuclear talks with the United States, saying this: I don't think nuclear talks with the U.S. will bring results. I don't know. Iran reportedly reviewed proposals for a fifth round of peace talks. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff says any deal between the U.S. and Iran must include an agreement not to enrich uranium, calling it, quote, a very clear red line. Of course, that's President Trump's line, no nuclear weapon. Iran's foreign minister dismissed it. He dismissed the administration's threats altogether against nuclear enrichment. He wrote on X, if the U.S. is interested in ensuring that Iran will not have nuclear weapons, a deal is within reach, and we are ready for a serious conversation. Enrichment in Iran, however, will continue with or without a deal, General. Your thoughts?
Yeah. Well, we both have red lines that seem impassable. And Iran loves these negotiations and tries to drag them out for their own favor. And I think what they know is that there's severe sanctions coming and likely an air attack as well. Israel's taken away their air defenses, but Iran is very desperately trying to rebuild some air defense capabilities that they have, knowing full well that it's likely that an airstrike is eventually coming. So that's where they are. And for the sake of our audience, on this enrichment deal, the reality is if Iran has the ability to enrich at any level, and that means they have to have centrifuges and the facilities to do that, they can do that at a secret site away from inspectors and have weapons-grade uranium in a matter of weeks. That is why our negotiating team has taken such a hard stand here. Any level of enrichment equals, under Iran's leadership, nuclear weaponization. Obviously, other countries, 23 of them, who are doing nuclear civil and power plants, and they have low-level enrichment, they're not proliferating to a weapon. But Iran is, and we know they want a weapon. It's indisputable that they want a weapon. We have all the evidence of it. They lie through their teeth here. So the negotiating team is absolutely doing the right thing here, drawing a red line. It has to be done, or they will get a weapon secretly if we permit that to happen. We know the facts here. We know they're cheaters and liars.
Sure. What a world. President Trump is taking it all on. Incredible. General, it's great to see you this morning. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, great talking to Maria, as always.
All right, General Jack Keane. Welcome back. U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff says any deal between the U.S. and Iran must include an agreement against enriching uranium, calling it, quote, a very clear red line. Now, Iran's supreme leader launched a tirade against President Trump on Saturday over the weekend, saying this: Trump said he wants to use power for peace. He's lying. Iran's foreign minister dismissed the threats from the Trump administration against nuclear enrichment. writing this on X. If the U.S. is interested in ensuring that Iran will not have nuclear weapons, a deal is within reach, and we are ready for a serious conversation. Enrichment in Iran, however, will continue with or without a deal. Joining me now is former Senior Director for National Security Council and Principal Architect of the Abraham Accords, Robert Greenway. Robert, thanks very much for joining us this morning. What is your reaction to this hostility from Iran?
Well, it's great to be with you. Thanks for having me on, Maria. I think the president has again concluded that enrichment equals weaponization. And so that appears to be where the current talks are headed, at an impasse between Iran's insistence and belligerence in insisting that it must maintain the right to enrich, which isn't required for any peaceful nuclear program. But that, of course, is not what Iran has. Iran's ambitions are clear. They've resurrected their nuclear program, and they're in a race to do it, closer now than they've ever been. And President Trump resurrecting his calls for the end of the JCPOA in 2016 and his first administration recognizing that as long as Iran maintains the capacity to enrich uranium, they'll have a pathway to a nuclear weapon. That's on full display now that 14,000 centrifuges allowed to be retained during the JCPOA are back in operation and have brought Iran to the threshold.
Yeah, it sure did. And you know, for a minute there, we thought that we were actually seeing, you know, some direct talks and an opportunity for the United States to quiet down Iran. And yet now with this belligerent conversation that they're going to continue enriching uranium with or without, the U.S. is okay on this.
Yeah, as the president stated, this is going to end one of two ways, either with cooperation or coercion. And in the end, the United States has demonstrated a capacity to do it, and this president means it, unlike the previous administration that appeased them with unlimited access to resources. And look, they're enriching now to 60%, not required by a civil nuclear program. Important to remember, it's not a 90% threshold that we're worried about. The bomb we dropped on Hiroshima was majority enriched to 50%, only a fraction to 80%. They're already there and developing a delivery system that's capable of reaching the United States. The threat couldn't be more real, and time is of the essence on this. And the president's trip to the Middle East shored up support for the United States and our partnership with partners and allies, an all-important signal to Iran as we get now down to the threshold in the end, perhaps, of these negotiations.
Well, I think this is a very key point that you make, Robert. The fact that President Trump had such a successful trip in the Middle East last week had to send messages to Iran. Liz Peek, jump in here. Iran had to be watching that trip and saying, okay, there are red lines even with our allies here in the Middle East.
Yeah, Robert, it seems to me two things. One, the breakthrough with Syria is incredibly important as it continues to ring fence Iran, which is great. But secondly, why would we go back to a situation where Iran is going to have to comply with strictures on what they're doing in terms of nuclear enrichment, what they're using it for? We know even the Europeans now have admitted that they cheated throughout the entire JCPOA. They pretended they weren't enriching uranium for military purposes. We now know that they were doing that. What's changed? Why could we believe them now?
Robert?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, and look, not only are they enriching at unprecedented levels and developing a delivery system and a nascent ICBM, they're also engaged in regional terrorism and bear culpability for the attacks of October the 7th. And so the Houthis' attacks on Israel that sustained, the attacks against commercial shipping are all bearing the hallmarks of Iranian sponsorship of regional terrorism. And so that is, I think, more than sufficient evidence to conclude that if they were in possession of a nuclear weapon, they might well use it. As recently as November of 2023, Khamenei, the supreme leader in Iran, stated that death to America is not a slogan. It is their stated policy. And it's not the first time he said it. And it's certainly genuine. And again, the president's Mideast trip accomplished a number of objectives, not least of which is restoring American control over global energy markets, which is critical message to Iran that they no longer will benefit by management and also by unprecedented prices for oil. But it also sends a signal to Moscow that they're no longer going to enjoy the same benefits as an oil exporter, and a message to Beijing that they're no longer going to be unrestricted access to Middle Eastern resources. All of that was on display for the president's trip.
No, that is such a great point. That is just genius. You're right. Meanwhile, the peace talks between Israel and Hamas apparently resuming on Saturday in Qatar. The release of 10 living hostages and a temporary 2-month halt in the fighting now on the negotiating table. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu confirmed that 20 hostages are currently alive in Gaza. And the Wall Street Journal reported that before Hamas's October 7th attack on Israel, the terrorist group head, the Gaza chief, told associates, quote, an extraordinary act would be required to derail talks between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is incredible. Right before the October 7th attacks, this, as new reports show, Israeli and Syrian officials have been holding secret talks on the possibility of Syria joining the Abraham Accords, Robert. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think the comments made in response to the president's decision are right in recognizing, one, that the United States insisted that Russia not be allowed a foothold back into Syria, Iran not be restored, and that they don't engage in terrorist acts. And then if that were to happen, then we would withhold enforcement of sanctions applied against Syria. I think it's a message to our partners and allies in the regions that the United States will listen and work with them, and that there's hope. But I think, again, trust has not been earned, nor is it warranted under the circumstances. And I don't suspect necessarily he'll be able to deliver on it, but I think it's worth a shot. And the president has always been inclined to prefer diplomacy instead of the use of force.
President Trump spoke about the Abraham Accords while he was on the ground in the Middle East this week. Here's the president on that. Watch.
I especially want to thank and congratulate the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain for their vision and courage in signing the historic Abraham Accords. But in the future, we'll continue that progress by adding more countries to the Abraham Accords. We have the 4, and I think they're going to be filling up very rapidly.
Robert, what is most hopeful here? When might we see another country join the Abraham Accords, and would the Saudis do it?
I think there's no question that it's going to happen. My bet is it's going to happen earlier rather than later in this second Trump administration. It's great to see him pick up exactly where he left off and build on the foundations of his legacy foreign policy achievement. There's no question it's going to happen. And I think Iran, of course, has to be probably resolved before expansion can occur, but it's going to happen and going to happen soon.
Meanwhile, President Trump I mean, he's doing so much at once. He's got a phone call scheduled today with Vladimir Putin at 10 a.m. He will also then separately speak with Ukrainian President Zelensky. Russia, meanwhile, launched one of the largest drone barrages into Ukraine since the invasion began, Robert. So, you know, where are we on this, and what should we expect from this phone call with Putin today?
I think the president's patience is wearing thin, and it's small wonder. Putin has demonstrated that he has very little interest in allowing this conflict to end anytime soon, which means I think that the president may issue a final warning before really turning the economic screws to Putin. He posted economic growth, the GDP growth of 4.1% last year, a point better thanks to Biden appeasement and slack enforcement of sanctions. So I think that could come to an end if the president decides that Putin is no longer interested in achieving a ceasefire under the current conditions, and I think that's very likely to occur.
Well, is there anything you want to say about China here? Because it seems like China, on the one hand, claims that, okay, we're taking the tariffs down for this 90-day pause, and on the other hand, it's complicit supporting all of the U.S.'s adversaries, whether it be Russia, Iran, North Korea.
There's no question about it. And I think the president recognizes that the strategic imperative in negotiations with either Iran or with Russia all come back to China. He cannot allow cooperation to exist between Russia and China, nor between Iran and China. And I think that's exactly why he's pressing on all fronts simultaneously.
Yeah, Robert, it's great to get your insights. As always, we so appreciate your time, sir. Thank you.
Thank you for